So tonight's our presentation's all about just giving you the basic fundamentals of how your sounder works, and then going through the various technologies that are available out in the marketplace today. So yes, we're from Humminbird, but certainly if you have another brand, you'll still get some of the fundamentals of sonar and how you read your sounder. So you'll still get some benefit obviously out of our presentation tonight. So we'll get straight into it. Going right back to the basics, we've got a little shadow effect there, that's pretty cool. How a sonar works, so we've got our transducer mounted on the back of the boat. This transducer sends sound waves down through the water column. These sound waves reflect off objects, whether they be fish, structure, or the bottom. So it sends that signal down and any reflection goes back to the transducer. So the transducer is both a sending and receiving device. The information comes back and then that's processed to see what you see out on the screen. So large fish will send back a stronger return than smaller fish. Heavy structure such as trees will send back a stronger return than light weed. And then the bottom itself, if it's a hard rocky bottom for instance, that'll send back a stronger return than a soft bottom. So that will then explain what we'll start to look at on our sounder screens as we go through the presentation.
Do I get a chance now?
Go for it.
So dual beam technology, in the case of our particular product that we're talking about, we have a great technology that we call dual beam. So our transducer emits that signal and receives that signal that Sean's gone through, but the actual signal itself, it's in the shape of an upside down ice cream cone, so imagine that. Now your traditional signal is nice and narrow, and it gives you, which is our lower frequency beam, sorry, our higher frequency beam. So it's giving you a great detailed image of the bottom. So we're getting our nice lumps and bumps and things like that. But the problem is that it's very narrow. It's only about 20 degrees. So that works out to be about a third of the depth you're in. So if you're in 10 metres of water, you're only looking at an area of the bottom around about 3 metres. Now that's pretty tough when you're trying to find fish and you're trying to find structure. You'd have to run a very tight grid pattern to find the sort of detail that you're looking for. So part of our transducers is we run a secondary beam or a secondary frequency, which is nice and wide, and it's a really good searching tool. So that spreads up to 60 degrees, and that's giving us a 1-to-1 ratio of depth to bottom. So if we're in 10 metres of water, we're now looking at a 10 metre area of the bottom. It's not going to give you the same detail as what you have with your narrow beam as far as your bottom definition is concerned, but it does allow you to try and find those things that are on the outskirts of the beam itself. So your fish, your structure and bits and pieces like that, you've now got the ability to search over those, but you've still got good target definition right on the bottom with your 20-degree beam. And those two beams are overlaid over each other as part of our menu system, and you get the composite image of both of them. So you're getting the best of both worlds, nice clear bottom definition as well as a large area that you're looking at on the bottom.
So just going through the colours, most units on the market these days have a colour units, but there's still some black and white obviously units out there. In the case of colour units, the first thing you need to identify is the colour spectrum that your unit's running on. So these are 3 examples, and if we look at the colour bar over to the side here, this is showing red as our hardest return. So before we spoke about large fish versus small fish, heavy structure versus light structure, hard bottom versus soft bottom. The heavier or the more dense the return and the stronger the return that's coming off these objects, the more red, in this case, the more red you're going to see in those returns. Or in this case over here, yellow is our hardest return, so the more yellow you're going to see in those returns. So to give you an example, going over a tree or a log, on this, it's going to show up with a lot of red in it, whereas if you go over light weed, that'll show up as greens or blues because it's a weaker return. Same with fish. Larger fish will have more red in the mark. Smaller fish such as bait fish will be these weaker colours coming through. So that's very important to know the colour spectrum of your unit in order to get the most out of identifying the different densities and things like that.
Fish arches are a really interesting topic, I guess. You know, you go and have a look at some units on display and you'll see those big traditional boomerangs that you see. Realistically, out on the water, to actually replicate that, it can be quite difficult. You've got to have a fish that's sitting stationary. You have to be moving at a relatively slow speed, and you need to get that fish to go straight through the guts of that beam, right in the middle of it, to get that build that full arch shape. Realistically, that's pretty hard to achieve. In the case of the Humminbird product, and here's a great example of where we're seeing arches, traditional arches, fish sitting stationary in a school. We're moving over the top of them. They're going through our beam and we're getting those traditional arches. However, as the boat slows down, those arches start to elongate and stay in a single line. And that's quite common. Realistically, there's a lot of product on the market that starts to replicate those arches. We don't want that. We want to see the raw data that we're getting back from the signal being sent from the transducer. In the case here, like I say, those fish are sitting stationary, so they're starting to go out into long lines. Back where I'm from, east coast of Australia, down in Brisbane, this is really, really common to see in our stocked impoundments with bass. They'll school up, and you'll sit straight over the top of the school and you can actually see those fish moving up and down through the water column as they're feeding on small bait fish. So remember, you don't have to see arches for there to actually be fish. You're looking for those good solid returns like Sean spoke about from the large fish, and in any form of shape where they're sitting stationary or moving up and down through the water column.
So this actual screenshot, if you just go back for me, Shane, this screenshot, so what's happening under the boat is right here, and that's with any sounder. With our traditional sonar, the fresh information under the boat is to the right of the screen, and this is just history that's already passed by. So we can't actually say that there's fish 50 metres behind the boat because we're seeing them back there. That's just history of something that happened here. It's scrolling through because it gives you time to process that information. But the way this screenshot, I took this screenshot about 8 years ago now, and we're moving over a big school of fish in a river, and you can see how this is all the same species of fish right through. I'd love to say they're barra, but they're stinking old European carp, but they've served the purpose here. So back here, I've just got the boat in gear, so I'm just moving slowly over these fish. And like Justin said, the fish enters the beam here. When you see the fish enter the beam, if you have a look here, all the sounder's doing is measuring the distance from itself to an object. If you have a look at the fish, if it enters from any side of the outskirts of the beam, the distance from the fish back to the boat is a longer distance than when it gets into the centre. So if the fish is there, the boat's here, it's measuring that distance. So if we use this arch as an example, it begins to paint a mark on the screen, the distance that it's detected that fish from the boat. As the fish moves in, it's sending signals down up to 50 signals a second down. So as it gets closer, you can see that the distance is shorter. That's why it paints up on the screen. And then if the boat travels over, the distance then increases again, and that's why the arch paints back down the screen. If we have a look at about the halfway point of this screenshot, where Justin said the arches are elongating, the reason they're doing that is I've just pulled the boat out of gear. So I'm slowing down and spending more time over each of these fish. So before, if I was heading over in that speed, creating an arch like this, if I slow down, what's happening is I'm getting more returns off the fish before it exits the beam. So that's why it'll paint a longer mark on the screen. To the point where right under the boat now, the fish is there, the boat's there, every time the beam goes down it's detecting that fish, and the distance isn't changing anymore because we're holding over the top of it. And that's why we're getting flat lines through the screen now. So when you talk about arches and sort of say, oh well, I've got to find arches, everything else is something else, you can see here the exact same school of fish look totally different on raw sonar just by boat movement. It might be a case where you're anchored and so you're stationary and fish are swimming under you. So you'll still get that arch format if a fish swims under you, but if it comes in and stops, it'll just flatline. And quite often, like Justin said, in the bass dams, if bass are active, you'll see lines up and down the screen. I think we've got a screenshot of that, seeing the bass going up and down. And if they're inactive, they just flatline. down the bottom generally. So that just gives you an example. So really don't sort of look for arches and discount other marks you see on your unit.
Bottom density. So we spoke about what the return of a fish looks like and how it actually portrays through an arch or all the way through to a line itself. But the great thing about a colour sounder is being able to see or determine what sort of hardness of bottom we have. And Sean's gone through the colour palette on the far right hand side there. So the darker the colour or the deeper the colour, the harder the return from the bottom. So we can see here, as we've moved along and come off this edge, we've got a nice thin red line. Think about it a bit this way. If we've got a tennis ball and we drop it on sand or soft mud, it doesn't deflect much off. Most of that energy is absorbed into the bottom itself. And that's a little bit like the signal that's been sent for the transducer. When it hits something hard, so you drop a tennis ball on a piece of concrete, we get a nice solid bounce that comes off it. So we're getting a lot of that energy returned back to the actual transducer, or the signal back to the transducer. So we can see here we've got a nice thin level of red, which is our soft, probably sandy bottom. And as we've come off the top, over this ledge and down into the bottom here, that return, that red return from the bottom, has started to got a lot deeper and a lot harder. So we've actually moved from what's probably a sandy bottom through into a rocky, hard, reefy type bottom. And we've also got those, a nice bit of bait or a couple of fish that are hanging off that initial lump on the bottom as well.
There's also a few fish on the surface. You can see them coming through. Again, not all arches, but they're not all sort of in a conga line lined up going straight under your unit. So that's them showing up there. So this is on the Daly River, typical snag. And you can see with the narrow beam, it actually shows snag structure quite well. A very wide beam, if your unit's set on a really wide beam, a snag will just show as a big lump of colour. Whereas with this narrow beam, you can actually see some branch structure and things. And we've got some nice fish holding off those snags. You can see here, so we've got, this is in the yellow colour palette, we've got some nice yellow in these. But we've got a weaker one here. Now, that could be just the same size barra as these two, but it's just glanced that outer edge of the beam. The signal's a lot weaker on the outer edge of the sonar beam, so you might have a couple of barra that have gone through more through the middle of the beam, and then that one's just glanced the outer edge. So if you're in a case where it's actually fishing pretty tough and you know the river's not cooperating, but you do see the odd mark like that, it's always good to turn around and just do another run over that area. You just might have glanced the edge of a really nice fish, or maybe a couple of really nice fish.
Now, as sonar technologies sort of increase on a commercial level, a lot of that technology has started to filter through into our scene, the recreational scene. And our traditional 2D sonar is fantastic. It gives us an indication of bottom density. It gives us an indication of where the fish might, well, if we're running over the top of fish and stuff like that. But the hard thing is, and Sean's explained it just there, that you know on that wider beam, as you go over a piece of structure, it can show as rounded off. And the other difficult thing is, how do we know where it is in that physical area that it's showing on the bottom? So there's a new style of sonar, and a lot of you guys and girls probably would have seen it, but it's called down imaging. And instead of having that big upside down ice cream cone, it's now an angled beam, but instead of being a circumference area that it's looking at, it's razor thin. And as it emits from the transducer at a very, very quick rate, it's taking tiny little cross-section pieces of image as it moves along and returning those back to the screen. And the advantage of this, if we flick across to the next slide, is that we can start to build image-like quality pictures of the bottom. So the example here is a very similar snag. I believe that's in the Daly as well. Yeah, so we've got on our left-hand side, northwest, so probably in America, yeah. We've got on the left-hand side here our traditional 2D image where we've got a nice picture of a tree, I would suggest, with a few fish sitting underneath it. But we're able, because we're taking tiny snippets of information thousands of times a second and building that image, we can break down into each of the individual branches of that particular tree and the bits and pieces and the fish that are lying underneath it. And that's a great way of being able to accurately identify the sort of structure that you're fishing over.
This is just an example, and again, just using all our units with down imaging have traditional sonar, and traditional sonar is still very important. In fact, if I had a choice between just traditional sonar and just down imaging, I'd take traditional sonar every time because it gives you bottom density information, it gives better fish ID information. What down imaging is good for is to give you more comprehensive structure information. So this here you could quite easily say that's a couple of lumps of rock or something on a silty bottom, but when you look at this you can see it's actually a car in this case on the bottom. I've run over plenty of cars, side imaging and down imaging. You'll see some nice side imaging ones shortly, but that's just a good example of how it'll just clean up the bottom structure information for you. Again with the, sorry, Justin.
No, go for it.
With the snag, so again split screen, it's not a big pretty tree or whatever, but certainly on traditional sonar it would take a fair bit of interpretation to work out that that's a heap of snags, but with the down imaging you can see the detail of those snags on the bottom there.
This is the one that I love. I reckon it's a great pick, but this is a gorge over in the States.
No, it's actually in Launceston. I took this shot.
Is that a cataract gorge, is it?
No, that's in Lonnie, the
yeah,
South
which is like,
Esk.
yeah, that's cataract
yeah.
gorge. No Tasmania, mate.
There you go.
Yeah. So what we've got here is a great indication of how we can see some great rocky structure on our down imaging. So traditionally on our 2D image, if we went over this, we'd see a lot of solid return in that, that circumference, but we wouldn't be able to break down the individual rocks and sections of it. With our down imaging, we can see that we've got shelving rock, big ledges, bits and pieces where the fish might like to hide out, and we've also been able to individually separate each of those tiny bait fish that are hanging off the bottom as well. With our traditional 2D image, they come up as a cloud, and it'd be hard to I guess break them down to get the target separation. But because we're taking tiny little razor thin pieces of information thousands of times, we're able to build that sort of image.
Side imaging. So we've looked at traditional sonar, we've looked at down imaging. So if you like good, better, then we go to best or second best because 360 is coming. I suppose what's common with traditional sonar and down imaging is they're both looking under the boat. So that's okay. You know, we see what's under the boat. What side imaging does though is you can look out either side of the boat now. So we can look 75, 80 metres out either side of the boat now and get that same picture-defined imaging that we're getting with down imaging. So this is where it really does change the way you fish. Looking under the boat, it'll only give you, say, like Justin said, in 10 metres of water, you're looking about 10 metres of bottom. We can look at 150 metres of bottom and see individual snags, fish, anything in that whole area. So essentially you could run up the daily and see the whole river as you're running up. So we'll go to the next screen here and we'll just have a look at how the screen's made up. So with our traditional sonar and down imaging, we're looking side on. So it's a bit like standing on the bottom of the river, if you like. You wouldn't want to do it up here, but what you're looking at is a side-on profile of the bottom, any structure coming up off the bottom, and the surface and any fish that may be on the bottom. So with traditional sonar down imaging, it's side-on profile. With side imaging, we're looking down from above. And the way I like to describe it is it's like draining all the water out of the system, jumping in a helicopter, looking out the left window to see what the bottom looks like, looking out the right window to see what the bottom looks like. That's essentially what you're doing. So we're looking down from above. This water column area here, this is what's going straight under the boat. So essentially this is down imaging to the right and down imaging to the left, but we're looking at it on a flat panel, if you like. And if you go to the next slide, what I've done is folded up that screenshot so you can get an idea. So the fold at the top is the surface or the boat's path that it's been over. Down either side, that dark area is the water column, and then the flat out either side is the bottom itself. So that's essentially what we're looking at with side imaging.
Just go back to that image as well? So the first thing I saw when we put that up, and I think Sean's explained it really well, is people starting to look like this at the screen. So yeah, we just that folded image. Remember that the dark section is your water column top to bottom, and then when we've actually got the profile of the bottom, we're looking or reading along the bottom left and right. Does it say what it actually is? Does anyone know what that is? Because it's a real odd one that you wouldn't expect to go and see on down imaging. Oh, sorry, on side imaging. The, in the States, there's a lot of their big reserves and dams and things like that, and they continually raise the dam walls to get larger storage. So as part of that, they actually end up flooding a lot of residential areas. That's a swimming pool.
They let them know before.
Yeah, they give them a couple of hours notice. It's sweet. I mean, they're only Americans, so
if you see them building a big wall at the end of town, you kind of get the idea.
Yeah, but if you look closely, it's probably a bit hard to tell from that image there, but right in that corner there, there's stairs into the bottom of the pool. And that's the sort...
See from the shallow end and the deep end?
Yep.
By the amount of shadowing.
And that is the sort of detail that we can get out of a side imaging image.
This one here we took on the Daly River 2 years ago because there wasn't any barra in there last year. So this is a typical example of using this technology to fish the Daly River. We have the bank over this side, and traditionally, like Alex would have explained earlier, a lot of the fishing is trolling into the current, along the bank where the snags are, and picking fish off, other than when there's that turn and they pull out into the centre. But when you're doing your trolling up the bank, with side imaging, what we can see is what may be out in the middle. And quite often we might see some big snags out in the middle that obviously aren't breaking the surface. We can also see other objects like this. And this is actually a rock pile. So the way side imaging works as far as density of objects is the brighter the object, the denser the object is. So fish, structure and things like that will appear brighter, and this is a silty bottom, so that will appear more dull. So we have a rock pile here in the middle of the river, and we've got about 8 barra sitting behind that rock pile out of the flow. So from an angling point of view, we go past here and we're concentrating over here. There's a few barra over here as well with a snag. But we see that, we just steer the boat, and so that we're passing those lures straight over that structure there. In the open water situation that Alex was talking about, running those shallow lures, we'll still use side imaging. In fact, it's the most important thing is side imaging, and we'll see barra coming through these sort of marks out in the open. We'll see those barra coming through, and we'll be constantly zigzagging our way up the river, trying to line our lures up with these barra that are coming through. And there's been times when anglers have driven past us and we'll go, you guys are about to get smashed. We just saw 3 big barra 20 metres to the left, and they're like, oh yeah, righto. Off they go. So it really does work, and more anglers are absolutely dedicating their eyes to their side imaging units to get this information.
So there's I'm sure everyone can work out what that is from that. Pretty simple, distinctive shape of a barra. This is actually in the Fitzroy River, and a nice, relatively shallow flat there. And again, these fish are cruising with the tide, trying to push with bait. And you can see that on this particular image here, we've got this large grain of rice, is what I like to call it. And we've got the solid return from that, which is the actual fish. But sometimes the shadow behind the object itself can give you a much better indication of what it is than the return itself. It's a bit like the chairs that most of you are sitting on. If you get a spotlight and you shine it on the leg of the chair, the leg itself is bright and bounces back to you, and that's the initial return. But the shadow behind can give you a really good indication of what the shape is, how high it is off the bottom itself, the distance behind the object, and even the shape. We can start to identify species, and barra are a prime example. They've got that lovely big wide body. You get a great return off them.
This one I took in New South Wales on the upper Hawkesbury River, and I put the boat in, moved my way from the boat ramp across to the jetty and marked 2 cars. and within about 5 minutes I found 5 cars and 3 boat trailers. So
They don't know about handbrakes there, it seems.
whoever's doing the driving testing there's got a bit to answer for. But you can just see the detail. We have a silty bottom. There's a tyre there. You can see how much detail. You can almost guess the make and model of car. It's that detailed. Over here we have a bit of weed. So that's what weed's going to... It's not going to show bright because it's still a soft object. But you can see all this information. We're in 3.6 metres of water looking 15 metres. So we're looking at 30 metres of bottom. We can, in one pass, we've learnt that part of the river straight away. You can see what our traditional sonar does. And that's what I'm saying about traditional sonar and down imaging. It told us nothing. Whereas side imaging told us there's 2 cars and there's weed over there.
I mean, at best, we're looking at 3 metres, area of the bottom, versus 30, so it's 10 times. It's as simple as that.
Is that fresh or saltwater?
That was fresh, that one. This one here is just one that I took at Patterson Lakes down in Victoria, where I'm from. Don't hold that against me. But you can see the detail, the way that the guys obviously etch into the concrete so that you don't spin your wheels. And you can see the etchings going that way, then that way, then that way. So again, amazing details in any rock structure. That's obviously the retaining wall where you tie up.
And we had, what ramp did we launch from yesterday, or retrieve from yesterday? Which one was that? Oh, some ramp. Anyway, it's very shallow out the front of the ramp, and you can see that at low tide, as we were going out of there was a couple of yachts that were moored up. And I was going past with a couple of customers ours, and I was going, that yacht there drags its keel at low tide, that one does, and that one does. Because we can see from where they're moored, the actual drag marks through the mud where they've moved. That's the sort of detail that we can get from this stuff. It's amazing. Everyone can work what that is. Yeah. That's me. I was really full.
So here's a good shot. We're in 3.2 metres of water, looking 10 metres out either side of the boat, and we've got about 5 barra holding in this snag. So the thing with getting this sort of detail of barra is bringing your range in. Like I said at the start, you can look up to 85 metres out either side of the boat, but the further you try and look, the smaller obviously all those objects are going to become. So when you're really honing in on an area, you bring it into maybe 10 metres either side of the boat, and then you'll start to get these amazing images of the fish and structures and things like that.
And I think one point that I want to make about side imaging is we're all busy people. We spend good dollars to get out on the water on boats. We spend a bucket load on fuel to get out there. It's all about maximising your time that you're out on the water. And if you can scan areas like that, you know there's a bunch of snags in a system, but you can actually find where the fish are sitting in those snags and start spending your time trolling and casting over those. You're maximising your time on the water and you're targeting fish. So it's a great tool for that.
This is a saltwater shot I took. Works just the same in fresh and saltwater, and you'll notice that all the screenshots, especially in the daily, we're still getting perfectly clear images. It's not using a video camera, it's using sonar, and sonar doesn't need any light in order to do what it does. So that's why we're getting such clean shots regardless of water conditions. But here, we again, one pass, we're in 6.3 metres of water. We're looking 26 metres out either side of the boat. We've got rocky structure here. It really does remove the guesswork. Rocky structure here. This dull area is soft sand, and this ripply bright area is hard sand. And I'm not sure about over here, but over on the east coast at low tide, we get all this ripply sand effect just from the way the tide goes in and out and waves, etc. And that's always really hard underfoot. And you can see how the side imaging can pick up those ripples. And those ripples are only this big and that high. And it's able to pick them up in great detail.
So the side imaging is great. So we've gone from 2D image, looking at a small area of the bottom. We've gone to down imaging, being able to accurately identify what that structure is on the bottom. Then we've gone to side imaging, where we're moving along and we're able to see either side of the boat. So we're looking left and right of the boat up to, as Sean says, 80, 90 metres. The next step up from there is being able to see all the way around the boat. Underwater radar And that's what we have with this guy.
Welcome to the inner circle. Rotating coverage up to 300 feet gives you a detailed 360-degree view of structure, contour changes, and fish. So you can see them before they see you. Introducing 360 imaging, only from Humminbird.
All the way 360 degrees around the boat and pick up structure that's now not left and right of us, but right up in front of us or off to an angle. So again, like Sean says, if we've got a fantastic bit of structure coming up for us and we want to get our lures straight over the top of it, we can just steer straight over. Bam, you're on it.
This photo I took a while back now, and I suppose this is just a really good introduction to, I suppose, grasping 360 imaging. We can see this slipway in the background here. We have jetties and things. There's big boats tied up either side of us here. And then on the 360 imaging, so the boat's in the centre of the screen, it's this blue dot. You can see the slipway going up through there, and you can see the white dots are the pylons, and then these large structures, you can see that hull shape there, that's a boat that's tied up just over to the left of us. But that's just a really good kind of introduction photo to sort of picture what you're actually seeing out on the water.
So this is an artificial reef down in Port Phillip Bay, and Sean and myself are we're out trolling for snapper with downriggers, and we're specifically looking for these artificial reefs that the council or the government's dumped up out there. And using 360, even while we're moving along, we're able to accurately see structure on the bottom, schools of bait and things like that, and present our lures to them. So like I said earlier, it's about maximising your time on the water, using the best technologies you can to get your lures and your baits and that sort of stuff in front of fish. We can see here, this is a old like barge, gravel type barge that they've sunk as an artificial reef, even to the point that with the 360 imaging, we can see the holds in the barge itself. So that's just unbelievable. And we know where we are here, that it's off to the left of us, halfway between our distance ring, which is what, 50 metres, our range. So we know that 25 metres to our left, starting from there back to there, is that piece of structure. So we're able to present our baits and lures over the top of it, accurate every time. This is moving to back to those impoundments I was talking about earlier with bass. So we've got on the left-hand side of the screen here a traditional 2D image where we're sitting stationary, and as part of that, like Sean was saying, because the fish is spending such a long period of time in that beam, it's coming up as a long line. But we can see that particularly the fish towards the bottom here, they're very active. They're moving up and down through the water column. They're probably chasing bait, and each of the tighter packed area of that school is at times fairly inactive, and then we've got some active fish at the top. So that's cool if we're sitting right over the top of them. But the big advantage with the 360, we can see first of all that they're actually in the water column, so between the top and bottom. But as we scan around, you can start to see, it's a bit hard from there, that the majority of the school itself is actually off to the right-hand side of the boat. So the big advantage of this over the side imaging is that we would have to be moving, we'd have to be consistently moving, because the transducer's shooting and sending information. We'd have to be rolling along. Yeah,
that's a new dance.
That's a new one. The side image moving dance. So we have to be moving along to keep building that image, because it's taking tiny bits of slices of information. With the 360, we're parked up on the spot lock on the Minn Kota. We're sitting stationary. We know there's fish under the boat itself, but from the 360 we can say that the majority of that school's off to the right there. We can cast and get our lures to go through them for more time. And I think the next shows the result.
Sean, back on that picture there for a second. Yeah. That dark area there from the boat, that's your water column.
That's your water column, the same as side imaging.
Same as side imaging.
Yeah.
360 degrees.
Yeah.
So is that the same diameter as your vertical too?
Yeah, so that's your depth down.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
That, so if that's 40 feet or whatever it is.
So they're the same fish marking on traditional sonar that we're seeing in there.
So that's a 40-foot circle, so it's 20 foot either side of the boat.
Yeah, but it's still down,
Still
same
down.
as side imaging. Yeah.
What are those lighter patches like? to the left.
These sort of ones, be bait. Bait will look like thumbprints if you like.
Yeah, that's a good example. And that's the bait fish that you guys probably catch to catch barra. So we won't go much in that.
Just an example of some laydown structure. So we've got some laydown timber all around the boat, and I like to talk about it a bit like a clock. You know, there's one at 11 o'clock, one back at sort of 6 o'clock. We can see the outer ring's at 25 metres now, so you can really hone in on exactly where to make that cast to run over, in this case, structure. The way we use it on the river is, like we were saying with side imaging before, we can adjust our troll run. However, we're only seeing those fish once they pass the transom, because the transducers...
Do the dance.
Yeah, I'll do the dance. There we go. The transducer's mounted on the transom of the boat. 360, we can make those steering decisions and moving the boat a lot earlier, because we can see barra coming in. So if we see a barra coming in over here, we can start steering across. So we're maximising our chances to get our lures over that fish.
And think about it a lot like when you're game fishing as well, where you've got multiple lures trolling. Every time you turn, the one on the inside gets lazy and the one on the outside runs faster. So by able to see where we're going, we can make that steering adjustment and we can better troll those lures at the right action to get the fish.